History Part 7, and we're still dealing with humans, but now we're going to talk about smart and beautiful. We looked this morning at tall and strong. What else can you piece together? We weren't here in the pre-flood world. I mean, us personally. So how do you piece together something that you weren't there to see? What can we know? Well, there's actually a lot more that we can know than you realize. And again, we're always asking that question, apes, aliens, or Adam? What makes the most sense? So Genesis 1:26, let us make man in our image, according to our likeness, and behold, it was very good. Well, specifically after this presentation, that's going to blow your socks off. That verse will never be the same to you after you see this. Okay, Jedediah Buxton. He was probably an autistic savant. Now, if you have an autistic person, 1 in 10 roughly will have some kind of unusual ability that would far exceed what you would normally be able to do if you had studied for quite a period of time. They just have this naturally, and that's just how they are. 1 in 10 are like that. So he was born in England in 1707. He couldn't write. He was obsessed with numbers. He counted the steps of people like at dances and plays and stuff like that. He was tested by the Royal Society in 1754, and he was able to calculate up to 39 numbers, which sounds like, I'm a skeptic through and through, and the first thought I'm like, 39 numbers, yeah, tell me another one. But I'm like, okay, let's put it to the side a little bit and consider other information on the subject. Well, Thomas Fuller, prodigy. He was born in 1710, and he was brought to America as a slave by Presley and Elizabeth Cox, who were both illiterate, by the way. He was known all over the eastern seaboard, and when Fuller was 70 years old, these two guys, William Hartshorne and Samuel Coates of Pennsylvania, they sent for him because they were curious. They wanted to see him in action. They wanted to see what he was capable of. So they asked him, how many seconds in a year and a half? And he answered correctly in about 2 minutes. It was 47,304,000. Then they asked him, how many seconds has a man lived that has lived 70 years, 17 days, and 12 hours? And he answered correctly in a minute and a half, 2,210,500,800. And one of them thought, oh, gotcha, you're wrong. Well, he had to remind them, you forgot leap year. So he was right, they were wrong. You had to factor that in for the guy's lifetime. Wow. So yeah, there are people like this, and this is just scratching the surface. So let's get a little bit more recent in time, something we can verify even a little bit more substantially. Truman Henry Safford, he was a prodigy born in 1836 in Vermont. He was asked by a priest at age 9 to multiply by itself that number that you see, the first blue one. So it's the number 365, there's 6 sets of them. So that big number by itself, to multiply that, and in less than a minute, he came up with the correct answer with no paper, and that's the big long blue one underneath. I'm not even going to tell you, I don't know how to even read a number that big. So that was the answer, and in less than a minute, he's doing that in his head. Mercy. In his head, and this is after 6,000 years of sin. Wow. Start to imagine what we were like in the pre-flood world. And by the way, if you get tired and need to stand up, feel free. I know it's after lunch. So he also developed a new method for calculating moon rising and setting that took 1/4 of the time that we used to do it in, and he ended up becoming the 2nd director of the Hopkins Observatory. She's my favorite, Shakundala Devi. She was a prodigy born in 1929 in India, and her trapeze artist father, he figured out real quick, she's my golden goose. So her father used her to amaze crowds with her calculating abilities from age 6 onward. And in 1977, she beat a computer twice. Now, obviously, our computers have sped up, but still, the thing she's capable of, she's passed away. She did the cube root of 188,132,517, which if you're a little bit, rusty on your cube roots, the answer is 573. I don't even know what cube root is, so. Anyway, so then she took 50 seconds to do in her head the 23rd root of a 201-digit number, which is the big long red number up there, 201 digits long, and she did it in under a minute. She told the 23rd root of that. And then in 1980, she multiplied that big long number by that other big long number in 28 seconds. So I just, my mind can't even comprehend this kind of ability. It's just it's stunning. Solomon Shereshevsky, born in Russia in 1886. I want to back up a little bit to him because he blew everybody's socks off. He was studied by Luria. In fact, he wrote the famous book, The Man Named S. They could not find an edge to his memory. It didn't matter what they gave him, numbers, poems, language of any kind, matrices of information. It didn't matter whether they asked him to repeat it forward or backward or 20 years later. It didn't matter. They could not find an edge or a limit to his mental abilities. They just couldn't. So, but the thing I thought was most entertaining was he didn't know he was any different than anybody else. Okay, so growing up, he just, we think everybody experiences the world the way we do. Well, he was a young adult. He was working in a newspaper, and he's standing there. He's not taking notes, and his boss had been doing a presentation for, I think it was like an hour long. But anyway, so the boss kind of started to take offense, and he says to him, why aren't you taking notes? And Solomon looked at him like, well, why would I take notes? And he's like, so you remember what I said? And so he proceeded to tell him what he'd said in the presentation, just rattling it all off, and everybody's looking at him like, how are you doing that? And he's like, you can't? He didn't know other people couldn't do this. So he had something called synesthesia. And some of you have it and don't know it, because 1 in 20 have it. Synesthesia is when one or more of your senses are cross-wired, and that's not just sound, sight, and things like that. It can be, like you may, well, let me give you an example. The best way to describe it is this Dr. Oliver Sacks. He started studying, he was at a party, and this guy was stirring the chicken cacciatore, and he mumbled to himself, oh, still a little too pointy. And of course, being a neurologist, he's all ears, like, what did you just say? Pointy? And the guy's blushing red because he's like, he'd learned long ago not to let other people know that he kind of, was a little bit different. And so he started studying this topic and publishing articles in the newspaper, and people started writing in going, you mean I'm not crazy? So this one woman wrote in and said, my husband has the most delicious, beautiful, caramel, crunchy brown voice. So she had color, texture, taste, all kinds of things mixed together. So when somebody speaks, or maybe, you hear music, some of you may be seeing colors, feeling textures. There's there's a bazillion variety of these. And so you may not realize you have synesthesia. There's nothing wrong with it. It's a pretty cool way to see the world. So anyway, he had synesthesia of everything was cross-wired, which actually made life a little bit difficult for him, because if somebody was telling him a story about, the donkey, going up the street, he's hearing, smelling, seeing a donkey, everything. And so he can get lost in the story and totally, following a conversation was pretty difficult at times. Anyway, one time he went up to buy some ice cream, and he asked the vendor, what kind of ice cream that she had, and when she spoke the names, he said it was like a whole pile of coals, of black cinders just came bursting out of her mouth, and I couldn't bring myself to buy ice cream from her, so he laughed. Because her words came out, the sound of her voice, for whatever reason, came across as coal and black and cinders, and that's just how he experienced it. So anyway, it's a very interesting subject, but there's all kinds of examples of people just having abilities that you just don't realize, and they're normal people that you wouldn't think of. Going far back, you may have heard of Pliny, the elder and younger. They were historians. He, for example, King Cyrus, he records that King Cyrus could give the names of all the soldiers in his entire army. And then Lucius Scipio knew the names of the whole Roman people. I don't know if he meant the town or what. They didn't specify on that. King Pyrrhus's envoy, Cineas, knew those of the Senate and the knighthood at Rome. The day after he arrived, he knew everybody's name, every last single person. Mithridates, he was a king that had 22 well, so there's 22 races, of the races that were going on, there was 22 different languages, and he was able to talk to each contestant in the race in their own language. So apparently he spoke 22 languages. So Charles Spurgeon, again, names that you're familiar with perhaps. Spurgeon stated that someone gave him a book to read, and then, one Sunday afternoon before supper, and at supper the man asked him if he'd had a chance to look at it. And Spurgeon surprised the man by saying that he had read it. And, the guy's like, you read it? You read the entire thing? And so so Spurgeon asked him to give a page number, and he just recited the entire page from memory. So this is the way some people are. C.S. Lewis, Narnia, Chronicles of Narnia, you're probably familiar with that. It's very similar. Asked him to take a book from his large library and just, give me a book, give me a title, give me a page number, whatever, and he would recite the page, same thing. So Leslie Lemke, getting into some music. So there's a lot of unusual musician abilities. He was born in Wisconsin in 1952, and he couldn't walk until he was 15. He was a poor guy. He really went through a lot. He couldn't see. His IQ was only 58, but he would play flawlessly after just hearing something once. So, they thought that they'd left his adoptive parents thought that they'd left the TV on because they hear this stunning music, and they're like, where's that coming from? They go out and they find him just playing because they'd gotten him a keyboard. Yes. That woman, if anybody deserves sainthood, she does. I mean, talk about taking the unloved and some of these people basically were told, just stick them in an asylum. They're not going to amount to anything. It's just going to drain on your resources. Don't bother. And yet she loved this kid, and she took him into the family, and to help him to learn to walk, she would strap him to her, and she wasn't a very strong, big woman either, but thankfully he was pretty frail at that point. And she would strap him to her back, and he finally learned to walk and whatnot. And it's funny too, because he had cerebral palsy, the spasticity where you can't control your limbs. But when he would sit down at the keyboard, he would just play flawlessly with perfectly fluid movements, and yet he couldn't feed himself. Just couldn't feed himself. So Derek Pavaricini, another autistic savant, he was born in England in 1979. Again, absolute pitch, and can play after hearing something just once. He began playing at the age of 2 and had his first concert at 7, and his first big one at age 9 with the Royal Philharmonic Pops Orchestra. And there's a TED Talk. A lot of these people, there's TED Talks on. So if you go on YouTube and you want to, learn any more about any of these guys, there's documentaries on there or TED Talks that you can watch some really cool things on it. And I'm going to give you just a sample of his music. I saw him play 2 pianos at the same time. It's crazy. The guy's amazing. Ellen Boudreau, very similar, but she's got an unusual talent that I wanted to bring up. But first, she was a blind autistic savant. Often music and blindness, for some reason, is paired together. But she would play something perfectly after hearing it only once. She would transpose music, like say rock and roll into waltz in 3/4 time, or jazz into classical. She could just switch genres, instantly. But she had an uncanny ability to replicate every voice, instrument, and studio sound effect. She could replicate that with her voice. But the fascinating thing was she had perfect passing of time. She would go in, sit down, turn the television on to watch her favorite program at the exact moment it was coming on, without a clock, without any outward device telling her what time it was. Boom. She can't see. No, she couldn't see. There's this able to judge the passing of time. She just had some kind of internal clock that she was following. Anyway, and she could use echolocation, like making a little noise and then hearing it bounce off walls and stuff. She could, tell where something is. But she can't hold a candle to what you're going to see next.
Ben Underwood is blind.
He's putting his eyes in right now.
Both eyes were removed when he was 3, leaving him with no vision at all. So how on earth does Ben do this? And this? And even this?
I don't think I've ever come across somebody like Ben. He is quite unique.
Ben lost his eyes to cancer, but unbelievably, he's taught himself to see with sound.
If he chooses to go out there and ride that bicycle, let him ride the bicycle. It's got to be very smart. Somewhere in there, it's a little genius going on. I don't consider myself blind. Ain't nothing wrong with me.
Ben uses many common aids for the blind, like speaking software for the computer, so he can jot down his rap lyrics. He's also written a book and does schoolwork on a high-tech braille writer. But what's unusual, what's truly unique, is what he doesn't use. Ben has no guide dog and never uses a white cane. He's not even using his hands. Instead, he sees with sound. He makes a sharp click which bounces back off nearby objects. Amazingly, Ben's ears pick up the echoes and he can precisely locate where things are. Ben is the only person in the world who sees using nothing but echolocation.
Yeah, truly amazing. I think I just jiggled the cord here. There we go. So, unfortunately, he's passed away. The cancer came back and he passed away, so we don't get a chance to watch his life progress and the amazing abilities. But they tested him, and he could tell whether something was, like, how big the column was. Like, they tested him to see, like, how big of a shape and how small of a shape can you discern. So he could tell, if he was walking past a car or a fire hydrant or a bench, and he would just literally weave in and out of, parked cars on roller skates, because he had trained himself to absorb sound like that. So amazing. Now, what I mentioned about somebody having typically 1, maybe 2 splinter skills, Kim Peek, which you probably know him better as Rain Man, if you've ever seen the movie Rain Man, that movie was based on him. He was what they call a mega savant, meaning he had more than one ability. He had 15 major areas that he was good in. He was born in 1951, and he had 15 core areas. Now, NASA tested him, and they said that he had no corpus callosum, the thing that, between the 2 hemispheres of the brain. So obviously that did affect, him to some extent, that we don't know how much that affected his abilities versus, again, what a pre-flood person with a normal, situation would be. But I think it gives you a great idea of, in general, what we were like. So let me show you this.
Memory, you remember?
Oh, shoot. Hold on. I guess I got to hold that in. Let me go back here.
Memory. He remembers everything he's ever read. He can tell you every city in the United States, its highways and its area codes and its zip codes and its television stations and its counties and when it was made its date, the history of any country, all the rulers and when they served, the presidents of this country, when they were born, their wives, their families, all of NASA's accomplishments, when they went up, when they came down, what they're doing. He can talk to you about the Bible. He can quote scriptures. He can tell you anything about it you want to ask him about. It seems like everything he reads, he maintains. At 9 months, the neuropsychiatrist said he's severely mentally retarded. He will never be able to learn. You should put him in an institution, forget about him.
But Kim was reading encyclopedias by age 4 and had finished the high school curriculum by 14.
Goodbye, old pain. I'm a leaving Cheyenne. You know that?
How fast can he read?
He reads a page that you and I would read in 3 minutes approximately. It takes him about 8 to 10 seconds. He reads the left page with the left eye, right page with the right eye, and remembers about 98% of it.
Did you catch that? He reads one page with one eye and the other page with the other eye at the same time. Yeah, it is crazy. And again, they said put him in an asylum. But this guy lived a wonderful, full life because his father didn't do that, you know. So I really think that judging the worth of a person by their, you know, it's just, we have to be careful how we judge people. So anyway, good example. The guy that was with him, the young man, he's going to be on the next slide. This is Daniel Tammet. He had Asperger's, which they don't really use that term as much anymore. Like a higher end, higher functioning autistic person what used to be called Asperger's. But he had that. He was born in 1979, and he has synesthesia also. So for him, every integer, every number up to 10,000 has its own shape, color, and feel. So that's how he remembers them so easily. He held the European record for reciting pi. At the time, he did it to 22,514 places. He speaks English, Finnish, French, German, Lithuanian, Esperanto, Spanish, Romanian, Icelandic, and Welsh. And he learned Icelandic in 1 week. And you can watch the interview online. He had 1 week to learn it, and they were going to interview him live, and he did. They interviewed him in Icelandic, and he functioned in it. So anyway, he said that for him, for example, the number 4 is timid like him, 37 is lumpy like oatmeal, 111 is shiny and bright. So for him, it's very easy to remember numbers because they're people to him, they're things, they've got characters and they're familiar like friends. So Jeremy Schuler, another prodigy in math, and there's a lot of them in math. You've heard of kids graduating at from high school and college at really young levels, and it's not uncommon. We hear more and more about different people like this. But what I found interesting was his language acquisition. His mother first noticed that her son was unusually advanced at 17 months because she was writing an email in Hangul. I'm not sure if I'm pronouncing it right, but that's the Korean alphabet. And Jeremy was curious about it, so she says, I wrote down all the consonants and vowels and I made the sound, She said, the next day I found Jeremy comfortably reading Hangul. And once he realized the English syllables worked the same way as the Korean ones, he almost immediately taught himself to read English. So he was able to read full books on his own by the time he turned 2. So now both his parents were aerospace engineers. In the past, I've seen people try to argue, oh, well, these people, they're just, something went wrong in the womb, and it's an accident, and they try to explain away these amazing abilities as a freak of, a freak of nature, versus them, in my mind, being throwbacks to the way we all were, and I'm going to prove it to you, and I think that this... They were both aerospace engineers.
Okay, because there was a connection with the young prodigies that someone worked, always their parents, one of the parents always seems to have worked in the hospital. So I don't think it was because the parent was a doctor or a nurse. They're now thinking there was something in the hospital they picked up, and now they,
Yeah, I think there's too many that are outside of that situation. So I don't think it was that. Yeah, go ahead.
Much off topic, but me and my wife had this thought when you brought up the Rain Man, was how he didn't have the part with
the corpus callosum.
And we were like, what if, just a theory, what if man had that same structure in brain and not the separated good and evil? So it was just something that just came to my mind. I was like, that's interesting.
I know it's not just that does it, because when we get into other types of savants, you'll see that this stuff can be turned on.
Oh, okay.
So wait, you're actually all savants and don't know it. So we'll get to that in just a minute. That's the next slide. Are you a savant?
What does that mean, savant?
Okay, savant is somebody with an unusual ability. Somebody that's extremely intelligent or unusual skill ability, something like that. So Some have argued, like I said, that this is just an accident in the womb when we're developing, and so they end up with skills like this. But this can't be the answer, because what happens to the acquired savant? Now, this is a category of people that weren't a savant, supposedly. They were just normal, but then they became a savant through an accident. An example is Orlando Sorrell, acquired savant, memory and math. In 1979, when he was 10 years old, he was struck hard on the left side of his head with a baseball. And after the headaches went away, he could remember the weather, where he was, and what he was doing every day since then. He could also calendar calculate, which if you're not familiar with that, somebody may say, well, what day of the week is, July 10th, 1954 or 2086? And they'll be able to tell you, oh, that's a Sunday, oh, that's a Tuesday. And you can look it up, and they're going to be dead on. They're going to be accurate. So that's what calendar calculating. So I wouldn't recommend you go trying to get hit in the head to pull this off, but, God bless you if you do end up hit. Another one that was hit in the head was Jason Paget. He acquired savant with math and fractals, and I'll show you the fractals in a minute. But he was beat up. He came out of a bar one night, and he was jumped, and he got beat up, and he had a severe concussion. And he really struggled for a couple of years with, like when you don't want to leave your house, germaphobe, paranoia, not paranoia, but you know what I mean? Just yeah, kind of like, So anyway, but you can watch him on YouTube too. He's got some great stuff out there. But what happened was when the pain again and the headaches and stuff wore off, if you watch somebody move something, or you watch a car go by, you see a fluid movement, right? That was gone for him. It was now like, if you've ever seen those books that have like one comic per page, and when you flip through, because one thing has changed per page, it looks like it's moving, but it's a little bit jumpy. That's the way it is. Life is for him now. Like when a car goes by, he's going to see static, frames of it as it goes by. Well, what happened was he realized, like he was seeing geometry and math. He said it was like somebody had pulled back the fun, superficial stuff, and he could see the math and calculus and geometry that was undergirding all of nature. So like when a tree moves and the leaves flutter in the wind, or a car goes by, he's seeing the math behind it. So he didn't know what was happening to him. He describes himself as a girl crazy, drinking, partying, good old boy, growing up, that he was coming out of a bar when he got hit, right? You know what I mean? So he was just a normal person, but when he started to try to make sense of that world he now found himself in, he started drawing all these beautiful geometric designs. And this physicist saw him in the mall. He's sitting there drawing a design, and the physicist says, "You look like you're trying to talk about space and time and the discrete structure of the universe, but I've never seen anybody do it in layman's term before. Have you ever thought about taking a math class?" And he's like, he'd never liked math. He was a party guy. But he went back to college, and if you listen to some of the interviews with him, like when he's being interviewed with Dr. Treffert, Dr. Harold Treffert is the world's leading authority on savants and prodigies. When you listen to them talk, it just sounds like a physicist, just like some kind of astrophysicist. It's crazy to listen to that guy. Anyway, so he did go back to school. These are some of the things that he's drawn. He actually has offered to make one for me so I can have it as a display, but it's going to cost, quite a bit of money. But he's going to make a unique one just for me. So when I get money on my list, I'll be able to get one of these. But here's some more of his stuff. I actually got to interview him live in Texas. Well, he wasn't in Texas, but his sister was attending one of the meetings that I was at, that I was presenting this presentation, and she says, "I can get him on the phone." So she got him on the phone, and right in the middle of the presentation, I was able to talk to him. It was like a dream come true. It was fascinating, absolutely cool. Anyway, just something quick I thought I'd mention from him. He said, basically, him and Dr. Harold Treffert, I don't believe either one of them are Christians. In fact, his sister asked me to pray for him because he kind of, sort of, maybe thinks there's a God, but he's not a Christian. Basically, he says, we come the brain comes loaded, factory loaded with this software. He said, I was watching my daughter, she was a baby, and I was moving my finger, and she was tracking my finger. He says, do you know the calculus involved with just watching a finger, and she's 6 months old, and so he says, I'm convinced our brains come factory loaded with this stuff, and mine got turned on, yours may not, but we're loaded with this from birth. And that's his opinion as an atheist, basically, or agnostic. And Dr. Harold Truffert said something very similar. I won't quote the whole thing, but both extremely intelligent people, and that was their opinion. So the million-dollar question that you have to answer is, if it comes factory loaded now in our brains, how did we get at this point in 2022? Was it always like that? Which I contend as a creationist, we are built this way, and we've been, again, losing it over 6,000 years. Or did somehow accident after accident after accident increase this knowledge and information and DNA and intelligence and stuff? And I think it's just, they call us crazy. I think it's absolutely berserk crazy to try to believe that, yeah.
Do you think this is how they were able to make the pyramids? Because I learned that they didn't have the type of technology we have in order to make it, and it's perfect. It's good. And they use the stars to somehow figure out how to put this all together.
Yes, so there's a lot of unusual, you can watch some of the documentaries where, the paintings inside, there's no soot marks, so what kind of, if they had torches, they must have had something besides torches, otherwise there would have been soot marks, when they were in their painting. The alignment of the pyramids, and most of the blocks are gone, the surface ones, but those that are in place, I think I read that they were not off even a tenth of an inch over a 15-foot span or something like that. It was crazy. It's crazy, And again, the same thing with not just Machu Picchu, but the stones I showed you earlier with all the different sides to them. They say they chipped those things. I was telling somebody a minute ago, those stones, some of them are 7 feet deep by 5 to 6 feet wide by 5 feet tall. So what? Okay, boys, lift them back up. We're off about 1 millimeter, 3 feet back on the left. Do you know how many times you'd have to? Do you know how illogical it is to say that they did that with a rock? So, and it was quite obvious when we looked at the stones. You could see that there were scoop marks down the sides of the rocks. I could show you these scoop marks. They had the ability to soften stone. I don't know how, but they were softening stone. They had to have been. So anyway, yes, there are post-flood, when they were dumbing down in size and height and age and all that stuff, we had the knowledge that those 8 people getting off that ark, they had seen the pre-flood world. And everybody they talked to, they could have described the technology, and they could have easily transferred some of this stuff. But that first couple hundred years were rough. Not only was the earth in geological upheaval, but they had a small population base. It was focused on getting food and planting and there was a lot going on. I think that as they started to get stable as a population, that's when they got to go out and map the earth, and after Babel they were splitting, and some pockets of people had technology that we lost. So.
And was it Columbus that did the mapping system? Is that he was the one, or was it someone else? Because how did we know how to do maps?
Okay, there are. The Piri Reis map, I'm not sure if I'm pronouncing it right. I think I found it was pronounced a little bit differently. But anyway, that one supposedly was made from in a more ancient set of maps that they no longer had. And that supposedly shows Antarctica without ice. I've only looked into that. I haven't had time to cover that in detail. If that's true, then post-flood, before the Ice Age, and we can't get into the Ice Age right now, but I think roughly that it was probably from 2 to 600 years post-flood. So anyway, I think that before that built up on there, they probably mapped the Earth. They'd had enough time to get their population base stable. They could spare people to go out and see what was left of this world they're now inhabiting. And so I think probably some of those maps later in the Middle Ages were built on some of those maps. So, best guess. If I just had 900 years to cover all this stuff and study it and scratch every itch, yeah.
Some of those maps, ancient maps, that say it only been put together by looking down at the
They also say something similar about the pyramids, supposedly, and I'm always going to say supposedly if I haven't had time to verify it, because again, I'm a skeptic and I want to know for sure whether it's true, but they say that it divides the earth into 4 equal land masses, equal sections. So how would you possibly know that at that time period, unless you had the ability to have flight post-flood? Yeah.
Because I know like the birds and different animals, they have like, there's like a sensor, right? Like they're connected to the earth. So what I want to know is, did humans have that connection to the earth in times past? I think we may have lost it to some degree, but I wonder if that could have helped them, in that direction.
So I've seen people with unusually good judges of distance and stuff, and again, by the time you get done with all these different abilities, it starts your mind thinking of what other abilities that we don't really focus on or haven't really, we haven't asked enough people, is there something unusual you can do? You know what I mean? We haven't coalesced all these different things, but I bet you there are things like that we're not familiar with.
Like the turtles, they know exactly
Yes.
where they were born. They go right back to that location.
Right. Yeah, so who knows? We've probably just scratched the surface. Yeah. Okay, so Derek Amato, he's another acquired savant in music. He played the guitar in high school, but he never played the piano, and he couldn't read sheet music. But 5 days after hitting his head, he played his friend's piano as if he'd been playing it for years. And he said that what he would see is black and white boxes, and they would go across his field of vision, and he would try to play as many of them as he could. He couldn't get them all, but he would play as many of them as he could. And I'm going to give you a little example of this. Okay, hit that one.
I had never touched a piano. I was a regular kid. I played baseball and chased girls, like boys do. I dove into a swimming pool 9.5 years ago to catch a football, and I hit my head in the shallow end of the pool. Basically, when I got back from the hospital, I slept for 5 days. On the 5th day, I woke up, and that's when I walked up to the piano. It was dusty. I knew nothing of it, how to play it, and I was just hoping to hit a couple notes, and that's when my hands just kind of went crazy, and I was playing fluid. It was instant. There was no building up or rehearsing or practicing.
That's the actual song.
I don't even remember being really shocked. I was just kind of like something profound was happening.
I don't know where the music comes from. I can tell you that Derek couldn't do it before. And it's amazing, it really is. It brings tears to people's eyes.
So again, no lead up, just boom, all of a sudden you can play the piano. Now another guy, Dr. Tony Sikoria, he is an acquired savant in music, but he didn't have it immediately. Like when he was struck in 1994, he was 42 years old, struck by lightning at a telephone booth. Just after he hung up and he was starting to walk away, he got hit. And after several weeks of memory and sluggishness issues, he went back to normal, but now he had an insatiable desire to listen to piano music. He had no previous interest in music whatsoever. And he had to teach himself to play, so he didn't have this instant, I can play, day after he, gets hit. But within 3 months, he was spending all his time playing and composing music. So his head just flooded with music, he said, that seemed to come from nowhere, and he was trying to capture it so that he could share it with the world. All right, acquired savant in art. This guy, he is really cool. This is Alonzo Clemens.
Alonzo Clemens is able to work part-time. Do you like your job at the Y?
Yeah, good trash.
Uh-huh. But a childhood accident left him with a traumatic brain injury. He can't read or write or do math. This is your studio, as it were. And yet, astonishingly, he can do this. When did you make him?
On the weekend.
This past weekend?
Yeah.
Oh. As naturally as the rest of us breathe, Alonzo can sculpt. His meticulous creations fill his Boulder, Colorado apartment. He's made hundreds of them, all with his bare hands. When you make an animal, what are you thinking about?
Run around my pasture.
You can see it running in the pasture?
Yeah.
This is the clay.
Yeah.
And this is how you start every piece.
Yeah.
He can't explain how he does it. What are you going to make?
Horse.
But he loves to show you how. So you just use your fingers.
Yeah.
We watched him work out every detail, from the mane to the muscles, all with apparent ease. Is Alonzo a savant?
Yes, no question. Hi.
Psychiatrist Daryl Trefford is research director at the Trefford Center in Fond du Lac, Wisconsin.
This is the largest planet, Jupiter.
And is a leading expert on savants of all ages.
67 satellites.
Savant syndrome is a rare but remarkable condition in which someone with a disability has a striking ability that stands in stark contrast to overall handicap.
Dr. Trefford says Alonzo is what's called an acquired savant. It's believed that his head injury somehow rewired his brain. He's coming along, isn't he? Damaging cognitive abilities, but freeing up extraordinary artistic gifts. That took you 15 minutes at most. I could take 15 years and I couldn't do it. Do you think Alonzo would be making horses today if he'd never had that accident?
Probably not.
So the thing about these situations are, it sounds like, oh, well, I mean, he was injured and his brain just rewired. But really, in the pre-flood world, you wouldn't have had to have these injuries for all of this to, you would be able to do all these things. Like, for example, if you show me that same scene of a horse running through the pasture, I'm going to come away with, I'm going to remember the head, the tail, the four legs, and the body, and that's about it. I can't remember, like, he's got a literal snapshot in his brain of the position of the leg and how the muscle hooked in everything. He's seeing it in that exact detail. And so, you know, we can't do that, but he can. You know, but pre-flood, I think everybody was able to do this. Oops, sorry, I went wrong way here. So that's just what's that?
We don't have to have our head smashed into, how do we
It's
get
encouraging.
it wired?
Well, actually, they're doing experiments with large magnets and to shut off certain parts of the brain in order to allow others to, like, run free, so to speak. And they're having some interesting success with this. So maybe without getting bopped on the head, we can still do some of this. I don't know, but you see it too, his strokes. Anyway, a couple more examples. I love this guy, Stephen Wiltshire. I want one of his paintings. This is also on my bucket list. Anyway, he was mute till he was age 5, and his first word was paper. But you fly this kid over any city in the world, and sit him down in front of a canvas, and he'll produce it right down to the right number of columns in the Pantheon. I mean, it's crazy. So this is a little thing on him.
I'm Stephen Wiltshire. I do drawings.
Stephen is an artist who creates incredibly intricate drawings of cityscapes.
I love drawing tall buildings, tall skyscrapers, skylines, street scenes.
And he does this entirely from memory. When Stephen was 3, he was diagnosed as autistic. He was completely mute and lived entirely in his own world. Early on, Stephen's teachers noticed he loved to draw. He had found his way to connect with others. Stephen has the ability to look at a subject once and then draw an accurate and detailed picture of it, including panoramas of entire cities based off just a quick look.
I go up on a helicopter and then would memorize it, and then after being on a helicopter and then straight back at the hotel and then started to draw.
His incredible talent launched an artistic career that has taken him around the world.
Los Angeles, Dubai, Houston, Texas, and Tokyo in Japan.
And that's just to name a few.
New York's my favorite, Empire State Building, Chrysler Building, and lots of yellow New York taxi cabs.
And Stephen has no plans of stopping anytime.
Anyway, again, if you want to watch more of any of these guys, get right on YouTube and check them out. Fascinating. Okay, Alan Morgan, language. He was 81 years old. He was evacuated to Wales in World War II, but he left at age 10 for England, where he lived for 70 years. So even though he was surrounded by Welsh speakers, he never learned it. So he had a stroke and regained consciousness 3 weeks later, and he was speaking Welsh and could not remember English. So now he had to learn English again. So there's other cases of like foreign accent syndrome where people wake up, well, all of a sudden they got a different foreign language. But this is, foreign accent, this is an entire language substitution of a language he did not ever speak, but he had heard growing up. So the amount of information your brain is storing is fascinating. Which, let me just tell you, one of my favorite stories is, I was reading it was in a Reader's Digest, they were talking about intuition. And they were investigating why, is there anything to women's intuition? Now, at any given, moment, male and female are taking in just trillions of bits of information, from temperature to color to, everything around them, the body, the amount of pressure on your toes and whether you're tired of sitting. There's so much information being processed by your brain at any given moment. Women have slightly more access to that information. So we both got the same amount. Women can access a little bit more of it, which tends to give them an advantage in regards to people. And whether somebody's a little bit slippery or, maybe not trustworthy, they have a little bit more access to the cues that are giving them that idea. I'm sure you can tell me stories. So, one of the things that they asked this fire chief, because this in the article, the fire chief, he was telling how there was this one time where his crew was in the house and they were trying to put out the fire, and all of a sudden he said, "Everybody out now!" And they flooded out the front door, and the minute they got out that front door, the entire first floor of the house caved in, and they would have all died in the basement. It just ended up a big pile of timbers and burning timbers. And they asked him, "How did you know?" And he said, "I can't tell you. It's that access, it's the cues, it's the experience of, the temperature building, and he's accessing something, you know what I mean? So it's not spooky paranormal stuff. It's just some of the just obscene amount of information the brain is processing at any one moment, and his ability to as a trained firefighter, to have access a little bit more of that than maybe you or I, obviously, that were, we wouldn't have known to get the guys out. So that's what's going on all the time. Yeah, go ahead.
Dr. Thrash told us years ago that there are, I think it was 10 trillion cells in the human brain. And she said, because of the shape of it, there are more possible connections than there are atoms in the universe.
Oh, I'm sure.
And so, the brain, with that much ability to store, there's no telling what we could store.
The gift that we were given with this brain is unbelievable. And that's why I feel like preserving your conscience from being seared. We sit down we wouldn't commit adultery, but we eagerly pull our chair up and watch on television something where they're doing the exact same thing. And we sear that conscience. The most priceless treasure in the universe is not actually our brain, but our conscience, part of our brain. But that we have to protect that. It's everything to us. Anyway, this I found interesting, fascinating actually. Alan Snyder, a neuroscientist, he gave 28 volunteers a puzzle that has stumped subjects for 50 years. So people tried for 50 years, couldn't solve this problem. He gave 28 volunteers this. But he gave them transcranial direct current stimulation. It's a form of shock, right? More than 40% of them could solve it. But none of the control group they were given a placebo, shock, so they felt like, it seemed like they were experiencing the same thing, but they weren't actually. They couldn't do it. So, stimulating the brain, the different things that can happen after an injury, there's all these different things we don't understand, stimulating with magnets and stuff. There are stuff that we could be experiencing, but we're not. So we got just a couple left, but I have to show you before we end. This little kid is phenomenal. And mind you, he's 4 years old. Did I mention 4? He's 4 years old. You could let me try, I don't know. I'm not sure what his name is. I'd have to see on my YouTube playlist and see what the original video was.
For a very long time I've understood by many people that you have to be autistic to have those skills. Like if a regular person like us can have, you have to be autistic. Is that true from your...
So you don't actually have to be autistic, and that's why they have the word, prodigy. Prodigy is a normal person. They can feed themselves, they can clothe themselves. They're all normal, but they've still got a bizarrely amazing ability. Disproportionate, like obviously, somebody could study for 10, 20 years and not play like that. So he's a prodigy. So you don't have to be autistic, but sitting down, for us, if we got injured, could we play like that? Maybe. That's what that other guy did, Derek. So, Rubik Cube, this is the world record holder, well, at least at this point. I don't think there's necessarily sound to this, but he can look at it, then he has to put the blindfold down and they put a piece of paper in front of him just to make sure that he's not cheating. In 16 seconds, blindfolded, he solves a Rubik Cube. I cannot solve a Rubik Cube without a blindfold. I don't know how they do it. I can't figure it out. I don't know how they do it. So he can do it in 16 seconds blindfolded. But this is absolutely amazing, this guy, this next one. Actually, me.
This is the size of the pellet Machi-san would try to slice with his sword.
She's got a pellet.
I honestly don't believe I could cut this if it was stationary on a chopping block with a chef knife. He's going to do it while it's flying through the air with a samurai sword.
Not only is the pellet tiny, over 4,000 times smaller than a baseball, but when it leaves the barrel of the BB gun, it's traveling over 200 miles per hour. A normal person would have no chance of seeing the pellet. So we're using a slow motion camera to slow the action down by 250 times. And helping me is Dr. Ramani Durvasula.
Okay, we're ready, Kay.
Kay is going to fire the pellet at Mati-san from a distance of 70 feet.
But I didn't see it.
I saw a flash. The blade went by.
All right, we're going to play back.
We're going to play back. Using the slow motion camera, I want to see if Machi-san has achieved the superhuman. Oh, man.
Wow.
You can
see the piece go one way and the other one go that way. Oh, that was amazing.
But how does Dr. Romney explain what she's just witnessed?
This is about processing at an entirely different sensory level because he's not visually processing. This is a different level of anticipatory processing, something so procedural, something so fluid for him.
A normal person would take 0.3 of a second just to register the sound of the gun being fired before they can even start to think about reacting. By the time they move the sword into position, the pellet would have traveled past them.
I think, yep, this is the one. You can see the little nick in it.
So, again, I'm just trying to paint a picture to give you an idea. There's probably many other skills that we don't know about, but you know, if at least it'll start you thinking down the path of what a pre-flood person would have been like, what we were all like at one point, and what we will be like someday. When God made us, He was lavish. I mean, just lavish with our abilities, and so this little girl, you just got to see to believe. Look at her blush. I thought that was hilarious because she literally forgets to sing at one point because, you know, he's down on his knee. There's this handsome older, you know, man on his knee, and she's just a little girl. You know what I mean? She forgets to sing. Oh, you start singing. Hilarious. So anyway, to finish, this isn't just a bunch of fun facts. This shows that God is a lavish God, tremendous gifts. And if after 6,000 years of sin, we still see this level of amazingness, it gives you an idea what He originally intended us for. If we had not sinned, you know, I used to think as a teenager, oh, I don't want to go to heaven. I mean, it sounds boring, sitting on a cloud with a harp. I mean, I don't want to do that. I had no idea, but you think about this world. If we hadn't sinned, all your abilities in math and music to do mosaic tile or, you know, art of any kind, all the different things that you enjoy, we would have enjoyed and used, but we wouldn't have had any pain and suffering and death and anything like that with it. So the final thing I'm going to mention is two shorter than normal, they had bigger than normal heads. There was originally triplets. But the one died, so there was only twins. These twins couldn't live on their own. They had, you know, glasses, and you know, like I said, they were handicapped in many different ways. So they were in an adult assisted living facility, and the doctor came in. This was before computers. The doctor came in and saw the two of them sitting across from each other, and one of them would say a 6-digit number, and the other one would smile as if he was savoring this number, and then he'd say a 6-digit number, and the other one would enjoy that number. And the doctor thought, I wonder if they're doing prime numbers. Now, if you're not remembering your math very well, prime numbers are only divisible by themselves in 1. So 1, 2, 3, 4 can be divided, so that isn't 1. 5, 7, no, 9 can be divided by 3. 11, 13, so, we can figure it out for the first 20, 30 of them, or whatever. Take us a few minutes, but we could figure it out. Well, for whatever reason, autistic savants tend to have a predisposition to, they love prime numbers, they come easy to them, they just, for whatever reason, they just hone in on prime numbers. So he suspected they were doing prime numbers. So he goes to the library and he gets a large prime number book out. And he comes back, next time he finds them doing that game of theirs, he opens the book up and he comes out with an 8-digit prime number. And the two of them just looked at him in shock. He said it felt like 5 minutes. They were just staring at me. And then this big smile come across their face, and they moved their chairs apart because they were welcoming him in this new, play friend. So he's sitting there, he's doing these prime digit. Well, they got to 10-digit, and that's all his book went to. So he couldn't continue with the game, so he leaves. He comes back a few hours later, and they're doing 20-digit prime numbers. Do you understand now what I'm talking about when I say, when Genesis 1 says, and it was very good, there ain't no way to describe what very good means. I can only give you glimpses of it. But that's what I'm talking about. One final comment on these things, if you look into them, there'll be times when people will doubt the veracity of, like, for example, that story was told by Dr. Oliver Sacks. People out there, the skeptics, like atheists, they're like, oh, that's not true. That story didn't happen. They said the exact same thing about Kim Peek. Remember the mega savant, the Rain Man guy? His own father, Kim Peek's father, said he reads one page with one eye and one page with the other eye. And yet you'll see people online saying, oh, no, he doesn't. I'm sorry. I'm going to believe his father over you, okay? So although I recommend being a skeptic in general, there are times when people, just because they can't conceive of a God this big, this amazing, you're going to come across things like this. So anyway, any questions before I finish? Questions or comments? Yes? I know, right? I mean, did you see the woman about fell off her chair when she heard the, that was hilarious. Yeah. All right, any final, yes. You're right. And can you imagine what we are going to be able to sound like in heaven? I mean, there's comments, I want to make some comments about the pipes, or in other words, the musical abilities that Satan has, Lucifer, that something like, that he can do 4-part harmony or something like that. Can you imagine, even begin to imagine what we are going to sound like someday? Yeah.
I have a video at home of this minister who, when they started the oil fields in Alaska, he went to the oil company and said, you're going to need a chaplain, and I'd like to be the chaplain. And they said, no, everything's okay, you don't need a chaplain. So a few months later, they called him up and asked him to be chaplain, to go up there because the men were having problems. And so he goes up there, and he's there for a couple of years, and he makes friends with oil people. And he says one time when he was back in the States, the lower states, that one of the oil men took him to the basement of one of their buildings and showed him some rock samples, some rock corns that they get when they drill. And he showed them one, and it had electronic things in it.
Wow.
They said they looked like transistors. And they said they got that from 700 feet below the ground.
Wow. We have a piece of wood from 900 feet below. Somebody on the North Slope of Alaska that I met his father when I went to Alaska, and his father told me about his son will be drilling, and they'll come across wood that's fresh, because because the ground is frozen, it doesn't go through the fossilization process that it should go through. So he sent me a piece from deep underground.
1,400 feet underground, it's in the permafrost.
Yeah.
So all that got pushed down and frozen,
Yeah.
and it's still there.
So.
And so another thing to add to that is that you ever hear of Dr. Shockley?
God Shockey?
The one that invented the transistor?
Oh, no.
I guess he worked for Texas Instruments, and he got the credit for inventing the transistor. But he died of drugging. A drugging, LSD.
Oh.
He called himself the high priest of LSD. And when I heard, put these things together, I said, possibly he did not invent the transistor. He was the one that figured out how to use it. And that bothered him because he got credit for inventing it, and it may have driven him to drugs.
Nikola Tesla is a fascinating person too to study because the ability he had, he could literally design a machine completely in his head, test run it, figure out where the friction points and problems were, and fix them before he ever set it in motion to create the thing. He would do it all in his head. Yes?
Well, I'm happy and I'm blessed to see that God really is amazing. And with some experience that I'm seeing with people, how they could be so advanced, you know. I'm happy that not the whole world, everyone in the world is like that, you know, because God knew what He did, and He allowed it to happen to this level that it's in today. Because you can imagine if every one of us was a genius like that, what would have happened?
Yeah, genius with evil. That's what that was what was wrong with the pre-flood world. That level of genius combined with evil intentions. Can you imagine what they got into?
And
So
then the
maybe
ability,
that's why God is.
Yeah.
and then the ability to live for a long term.
Yeah.
Yes.
To do all that. To do
Yeah.
all that evil perpetually.
Yes.
Short period of time.
And you, and just to piggyback, because I was thinking about one of the statements, and I was reading this book called, because I got kids, School Can Wait by Raymond Moore, and him as well as Joshua White talks about the developmental stages of the brain, and that as we grow older, we tend to start using less aspects of it as the wires of the brain start to neurologically develop. And you get an example of like how it's easy for a child to be able to pick up multiple languages when they're young versus when they're older, and that the brain starts to say, okay, well, we're not using these stages, let me work and develop these other stages, and it gives you the opportunity to see the brilliance and the potential of this polluted mind, the way it is, and how get some water. And like you said, it's seeing these individuals who, whether it's by birth or by trauma, have been able to utilize aspects of their brain. It just reminds us of the brilliance that God created us with, and the ability. Some of it, we can be able to achieve some of those things, not to those levels, in working it. And for some, with them working it from younger, we have that capability. I had a question based off of one of the statements that Pastor said earlier. With the boats, I remember at one point they were saying that they believed that they found sculptures in Turkey when they were looking at the shape of the float on one of the mountains, and then they had like these huge rocks with holes in it. Do you think that might have been one of the? Do you think that has a potential area where it could have proven that where Noah's flood was? Are you familiar with it?
Yeah, you're talking about the drag stones, right?
Right.
Yeah. So he's the expert on Noah's Ark. I mean, obviously the worldwide flood. Right. I mean, it was worldwide, but in that area where the Ark came to rest, there are some stones like that they're tall, big rectangular things with a hole in the top, right. And boats would use them to stabilize, right. You know, in storms. And so they do think that those were perhaps for the Ark. We don't know for sure, but they're the Ark where it's on the hillside that looks like a big, you know, the one that Ron Wyatt found, that's not the real Ark. The real Ark is on the northeast side of the Mount Ararat. So that's, yeah.
what Pastor spoke about earlier with, and what you're speaking about, have this conviction that you spoke about creation and redemption, and you're speaking about all this talent, this brilliancy. I have this conviction that as the latter rain starts to fall, I wouldn't be surprised if God brings out some of this sort of brilliancy in His people to bring forth the message with its power, that people would notice that, we have this sharpness. I wouldn't be surprised.
Maybe, although we don't do this message with wisdom of words, how it says, but the conviction of the Spirit. And Jones likes to quote Ellen White often in his, like if you've read the 1891, 93, 95, 97 sermons, he likes to quote Ellen White where she says, of this power we must not be deprived. We must not allow ourselves to be deprived. In other words, I can get up here and say something to an audience, but if the Holy Spirit doesn't bring it home, I stand and talk here till I'm blue in the face. It isn't going to affect the human heart. So it's not the ability of words or the intelligence of creating a cool presentation. It's always going to be the conviction of the Holy Spirit bringing home what you say to the person. So whether He gives us any additional intelligence in the end, it won't matter as long as we are given the Holy Spirit.
Amen.
Most important thing. All right. I guess that's it. Thank you for letting us come. And
what about like amalgamation? Like dealing with like dinosaurs, were they amalgamated or, were they created by God? Or, there's argument. Yeah, on the ark.
oh no, they were on the ark. Some of them were. Yes, some of them were on the ark. Okay, so what's that? Yeah, just get a pink and blue one, right? So, yes, God made dinosaurs. I have a whole presentation on this too, but He made dinosaurs, but like a lion, for example, lions are, can be scary. They're a magnificent, strong, ferocious animal, but they're a little cuddly, cat too at the same time. Pre-sin, they would not have eaten animals. They ate plants. They ate grass. Just like all the rest of the animals. Post-sin, they were some of the animals that became meat eaters. Dinosaurs were the same way. Some of them became meat eaters. Some of them stayed plant eaters. Magnificent creatures. We always used to paint them as gray and ferocious. We now understand many of them had stripes. Some of them had feathers. Some of them had flowerette patterns, like a setter with like petals around it, or repeating flowerette pattern. I actually got to see this in person finally. There's an imprint of dinosaur skin in a museum I was in, and I have videos of it. So they had patterns. They were probably very beautiful in many ways. Some of them may even have had iridescence. But yes, some animals like crocodiles are gray. Some of them do, look, scary like that. Some of them, as far as amalgamation specifically, though, there's only like 3 quotes that Ellen White uses in reference to this. And I have a short, it's probably like 2-3 page article that I read. Of all the resources I came across, it was an Adventist scholar that had gone through the quotes, and he had given, I can email that to you. I find that probably the best source. But suffice it to say, in my opinion, in both of our opinions, some of these dinosaurs look like they were modified. Think about if you're really smart and you have all the resources at your command. Look what we're doing with gene editing now. We're doing things behind the scenes we're not supposed to be doing in the various countries. They're getting away with stuff they're not supposed to be doing. So if you wanted to have a war animal, for example, a living war animal, you look at some of the spikes on the tails and some of the ways some of those dinosaurs, they look like they could have been altered for war. So it's possible that they were messing around with that. Ellen White does say that everything that was basically messed with did not get on the ark. But we didn't have the word dinosaur until the 1800s. We had the word dragon. If you look in Chinese literature, there's too many resources, too many things about dragons that look like at least some of the dinosaurs that we're familiar with. So there's also, I won't go into all of them now, but there's a number of different reasons around the world why some of them were on the ark. They died off post-flood. Through the centuries, they either got hunted down or the earth couldn't support their eating habit. I mean, the amount of food that a dinosaur would, one of the big sauropods would eat in a day we couldn't sustain this here on the planet the way we got it now.
You're saying that, are you implying that they were, okay, because I know the quote, she talks about the confused species in which God did not make, he didn't bring them onto the ark. So this is crazy because we literally was going back and forth for maybe 3 days about this, and I was saying we believe that like gene splicing, like they went and they messed because the intelligence that they had, and we know that the days are going to end at the days of Noah and Lot. So basically, this stuff is going on today, in maybe not to that max extent, but it is still going on today.
And you got to figure in the pre-flood world when everything was strong and newly created, there was probably ways of combining animals that we can't do today. Whether they really had centaurs and stuff like that, half horse, half man, some of the other things that are in Greek literature, it's hard to say. It's possible they were doing things like that. It's possible even that some of the weird skeletons that we see that look like a cross between an ape and a human, they might have been, look, if you wanted slaves, if you wanted somebody that could serve you, intelligently enough to serve you, but not enough so that they would mass revolt against you, cross them with some form of ape. So it's possible they were messing with even humans in the pre-flood world, not just the dinosaurs. It's hard to say. But anyway, that was all wiped out.
Ladies and gentlemen.
What's that?
Yes, I have a question. We know that the enemy makes always a counterfeit of what God made so perfect and great. So I would like to hear from you. What do you think there are schools and new methods that are teaching ways of meditation to connect your brain in such a way that you can have that kind of memory, that you can use math quickly, that you can read books in minutes. So there's actually people teaching, people come like us to get those kind of abilities. And how they do it through meditation, through certain spiritualism. So when I heard that, the meditation and the spiritualism, I think is the enemy using what he knows we were capable of. I don't know. Can you elaborate something?
I'm not going to pretend to necessarily, know on every subject like that, but I'm similar to you in the sense that, when I hear them getting into the meditation stuff, anything that empties the mind or attempts to empty the mind, we're not meant to be a vacuum. Yes, we're too hectic and crazy, and we could all benefit from stepping off the crazy train and meditating on God's word, for example, on a verse or a characteristic about him that we love. But to try to empty our brains, I don't think that's safe. And to necessarily pursue those abilities, if that's something they want to do, I don't know exactly what they're doing for meditation, but it sounds like it's just not worthwhile to me. As Adventists, we're called to the highest goal ever given to the human race, and that's to prepare people for translation. So more important than greater intelligence and a faster ability to do math or any of those things is to know the Word of God and memorize it and be able to share it in a way that somebody can relate to it. So personally, it'd be like, it's a non...
Yeah, for people who do not believe in God, right? The driving force is to get better jobs, to get, quickly money. This is how we sell it. But for us, we see all the beautiful and wonderful ways that God made us. The capacity where we don't even see visuals, such amazing videos today. See a glimpse of what we're like. But even above all of that, what I am thankful to the Lord is that what is most important
basically, Satan's got something for everybody out there, 51 billion flavors of ice cream, anything but Jesus. Anything. People from flat earth to we never went to the moon to whatever. There's something out there for everybody. Anything but Jesus. That's what he's trying to do. So, but we'll finish here. If you got any questions afterwards, you can come up afterwards. That way, at least everybody else can go that wants to go. Thank you so much. You're very welcome.
Why don't we have a word of prayer as we dismiss here? Father, thank you for the Sabbath as the sun sets, and I pray that give us a blessed week. Thank you for everybody being here today. Thank you for having us out here today, and let us take a piece of you onto others as we leave this facility, this beautiful church here. In Jesus' name, amen. Thank you, everybody. Oh, do I get a hug? put in front of you. These guys, he does have a lot of things going on, but he's just kind of, well, he is incredible to watch. Because he's smart. I watched them all, I think. I got all of the CDs or DVDs, we watched them. Well, we just watched them. Have you ever heard of Dr. Carl Baugh from the Creation Evidence Museum in Glen Rose, Texas? He's the bomb. He's not an Adventist. A lot of Adventists out there, a lot of Adventists go to